This evening, there is the opening reception, which is kind of weird on day 2, but we're having the opening reception also in the Dolby Ballroom. And next up, we have a great panel discussion from Emulsion to Pixels, a colorful conversation about preserving the art of color, fostering continuity in technological transition, and embracing innovation. Our moderator is Laquie Campbell, and welcome, panel. So,
thank you. Hello, everyone. You are at the best post-lunch conversation. I think we're going to keep food coma at bay with this insightful crew. So thank you for coming. My name is Laquie Campbell, and I want to thank Cindy first for allowing me to put this panel together. On behalf of the Hollywood Professional Association Women in Post Committee, I also want to thank them for entrusting me with putting this great crew together as well. So absolutely. So let's get these introductions going here. Directly to my right, we have Sheri Eisenberg, senior colorist at, forgive me, it is motion picture imaging at Warner Brothers Discovery. And then we have Tahira, senior colorist at Arsenal Color Effects, and Rory Gordon, senior colorist, Keep Me Posted. So please give them another round of applause to keep off the food coma. So thank you again for stepping away from your bays and your busy schedules to do this today, because I know all of you are extremely busy right now. So let me set the tone before we dive in a bit. Color has been and still is one of the most powerful tools that we have in the industry. And color isn't just about making frames pretty. We're about making them true and accurate in every way. So as everything changes with our consumption and delivery, it's changing rapidly. And that means that how we're managing things are changing rapidly. But there's a lot of preservation that needs to occur as well. So that's what these experts are going to be talking about today. So, because we have less than 30 minutes, let's dive in. So I want to first ask you guys, how has the evolution from traditional color timing to digital color grading transformed post-production workflows? And what lessons from traditional techniques remain valuable in modern digital color management?
Okay, I'll start. I go pretty far back, further back than I'll admit. And in some ways, the basics, I still work mostly in preservation. And so the necessity to find where original camera negative wants to be is still part of the workflow. When I started, we always started with interpositives. The studios didn't want to give us original camera negative for good reason. So a lot of the timing was built into the starting place. So now we're in this 4K, 8K world. So the studios feel it's responsible to scan the original camera negative and save it. And so now we're working with completely untimed elements. And so you still have to find the true place for the film. And there's not going to be like a quick button for that. You have references, you have prints, and, filmmakers when possible, but you still have to find where the film needs to be. It's just more work.
Yeah, I think color management, even in today's workflows with HDR, within any color volume that you're working in, the management part of it is still key. But we probably now don't have to fight a lot of the technical improbabilities of keeping the gear or the image in exactly the same place, even as you were saying, Sheri, when you started on a telecine at 9 a.m. versus noon. So I do think that the triage skills that you have from those days when that drift was possible, I hope that, especially, as I've come up, I've been fortunate enough to work with professionals, even though I've come of age professionally in a digital world where my mentors have had to work in environments like that, where there's a little bit of alchemy in keeping the gear in the same place all throughout the day. Now, I think our gear is maybe a little more, it's not so much a moving target throughout the day, but we have to really maintain effort to keep the management going consciously, because that lets us, move creatively.
And I, like Rory as well, come up in kind of the digital DI world, but you never know your entry point. I worked in restoration early on as well, and kind of understanding the entire workflow and the entire pipeline is really informative. And even now we have new projects that want to have film outs or want to reference looks from the past, and all of this connective tissue and connective expertise is extremely important in understanding intention and why before you get to the actual visible how or what.
It's also kind of interesting. It's really easy to get tangled up in the tools, like having a rightness or a wrongness to them, whereas the tools are really all amoral. But we have to know, like, what did this come from? Was it IP? Is this print? Like, or is one of these, if it's a restoration project, is one of these reels different than the other? But once we know what the tools are, then we can use them creatively. But the tools themselves are amoral.
Yeah, that makes sense. So you all talked about kind of the evolution and adaptation that we're going through. How are traditional color timing craftsmanship and artistry being preserved or compromised in today's digital streaming ecosystem, particularly as new tools and delivery requirements reshape post-production workflows? You kind of already covered some of that, but I think there's a little more expounding on that as well available.
I think the great thing about HDR actually is that now we're in a really big color space. So when we go back to these original negatives, having color corrected in NTSC, I said it, in NTSC and then in, HD, like the color spaces just get bigger. And when we go back to these negatives, you're just able to take advantage of all this imagery that's there. So the real stewardship is, referencing the looks of the past and trying to get that original camera negative from 1950 maybe to look appropriate in the current display technology. And that's a bit of a taste, which is hopefully maybe happening with a filmmaker, or it's happening with the studio. It's happening with stewards of the film who've been around it, so that you can kind of gracefully bring it forward. So there's a new audience, so that there's a whole new generation that falls in love with a film, and it still feels relevant. And the tools are so good. I mean, I will say one thing about current color correction tools. Some of our elements are really, our negatives are faded, or sometimes there's a mix of dupes and neg and all sorts of things. And we can use the power now of those tools to get all these things to feel, seamless. And that's where the things come really, where the current power really comes into play. And I start to feel like, okay, things are getting better. I can actually get closer. I'm even referencing my own master sometimes from 10, 15 years ago, and I can now get it even better. Every time we go back, it gets better.
Yeah, I think it's really important to study the context of the images that you're working on. As you said, like you might being able to watch a reference print that's, watch something that was held in archive. That's a little bit different than it takes the ability to study the references that were coming from the analog systems and then move yourself to a container where you also have to study, the new tools that are available. You have to study how we can push color now. I think being studious about both the past and the future is it's very important to keep both of those things in sight of like, what were people trying to say, and what do my tools have now that are things that could help me speak in a way that's different but maintain the spirit of the title.
Yeah, it presents new ways to really interrogate the look. Thinking back, you can kind of, with the new technologies, determine, okay, what was merely a limitation of the display technology of the time in this image? What was was this a limitation of the capture technology of the time? Or was this a creative decision? And whether you're in remastering and you're maybe wanting to remain true to the creative intent, or you're working with a new director or DP that wants to experiment with an old look. And we can say, okay, well, this portion of the look was a limitation of the display. This was a limitation of the capture technology.
That's something that we didn't really, have in the past. The things when we were hanging inner positives in the past, we knew this wasn't necessarily an archival moment, but now it does feel that way. So we're saving as much as we can. And then the colorist or Sheri, me 10 years from now, knock on wood, will load my list and be like, okay, so this was when we did the HDR 4K version, but now we're doing the 8K HDRX version, and I can just project that forward. And it's important because whenever, again, we can, if we can bring in the filmmakers, the cinematographers, the directors, that look is now saved. That their eyes, that intention is saved for the next set of people who are going to look at it after I'm gone.
I do think that's really neat too, because you make decisions in context. The filmmakers made decisions that were of the tools that they used, but a lot of times great creative decisions come from limitations too. So it is neat to be able to study that and preserve that.
Yeah, so no matter the tools, you're still making decisions about basically like how you're keeping the story in every frame that you touch. So that doesn't change. So all of you have some great experience, and I think we know, obviously, other generations, they are aging and retiring, and the opportunities to transfer that knowledge there hasn't always been a straight linear path to education and training. So I am curious what you all think about how can all of you in experienced film and tape era colorists help preserve and transmit their craft knowledge to the next generation, and what structures need to be in place to facilitate meaningful mentorship in today's digital post-production environment.
I think this is really important for creatives in general, and especially our creative community. When I think about what we do, kind of part of the awe of the art form is rooted in the science of being able to experience a movie in one space and have that same visual experience across the country in another theater. And then another part of that awe is in intention, and all of that information is in my experience has been passed down. I know about some of kind of the film workflows that were happening before I was even alive. And that's due to working with colorists that were timing in that era. And I think it's so important that people that find interest in color, they're not just reaching out to the internet, which I think is an amazing space, but that we're creating spaces. The color assist position is extremely important. It allows for craft continuity and creative continuity. So yeah, I would champion facilities and spaces to make sure that we have that connective tissue, because this knowledge is really important.
Yeah, I think the more we teach, the more it's learned deeper personally. I think being in the room is incredibly valuable. Opening your door to young folks that are interested, and also never being afraid to explain fundamentals, because I think that having a deep understanding of what makes this image, what are the pieces to get this in the workflow properly, but what are the big picture things that you're thinking about when you go through an episode? Because especially in episodic, where I do a lot of work, like we fly at incredible speeds, and you're never going to get through 900 shots if you're just doing the most intricate, showboat type of thing possible on if you'll never get past the first 10. So having an open door to anybody that comes in and being willing to explain that could help you meet someone who really has the temperament to do this job, because it's such a weird job. Like we sit in dark rooms, we spin balls, and then somebody comes in and it's a high pressure hour, and then hopefully they're happy and we never talk about us again. But like, it's such a high pressure job. Somebody was asking me the other day, like, oh, what do you think your style is versus this other colorist? Like, do you have different genres that's just yours? And my answer was no. I think any technically competent colorist can do any number of looks. It's more about how you work with people that differentiates any individual colors from another. But we have to be on the lookout for people that have the temperament to sit in a dark room and then have one very high pressure hour,
Right.
because it is an odd job.
Mm-hmm. I will say that, if, anybody has the opportunity to participate in mentorships, I recommend it. There's sort of a double-edged sword in restoration. A lot of times it is an entry point for color correction. That's how I entered and I fell in love and I stayed. For some people, that is the entry point. And, restoration budgets are, span a huge spectrum. And sometimes, a lot of times, the work just doesn't support, assistant staffs, assistant colorists, junior colorists. These budgets with these kinds of work, it's just not there. So it's kind of difficult. The restoration work's a good entry point, but how do you get in? How do you get into the room? And even while I was trying to mentor someone, I realized how hard it was just to get her in the room, even when that was my intention, was to get her in the room. So it is challenging. And, I'm not exactly sure how to, but I would say that if there's, anybody, sort of listening that is even remotely interested in this kind of work, to be a fan of the work. Because the reason studios restore movies is because it will make them money. It's not like an altruistic, event. So if they think there's a market for something, for a movie, for a Blu-ray, for a Fathom event, then they'll do it. And so I guess implore people always whenever I get somewhere to say, be a fan of the movies you love, and the studios do notice. And then they say, okay, there's a market for this. And that's how we end up doing, your favorite movie.
And I would just also say that, kind of working with people that have experienced the industry longer, as we see new technologies come in and there's some nervousness about maybe AI or things like that. Well, you can talk to colorists that are like, well, we were all nervous when they switched to digital capture. And you can see the changes in workflow and DI, how things were adapted, what tools kind of translated over. Yes to everything. Yes to having more people in the room. Don't be scared of changes. The fundamentals can kind of keep you through, technological changes, I think, as both of you all have been saying. So, yeah.
I think it's also really important, for us, as a senior facility members and for other members in a facility to remember how hard data IO shifts are and daily shifts are. And anytime we can give little, I think that job can be really thankless at times. And I think it's important to reward any interest with being generous with your time and your knowledge.
I have another question. So in July, YouTube was #1 for living room viewership. And I would love to know what your guys' thoughts are on, how viewing modules are changing and how that is going to impact color, the thoughts on the technical artistry of it.
Well, yeah, I was going to say, as we lean into craft, as you mentioned, there is an unmanaged color space, or like an unmanaged color streaming service in YouTube that people are watching things in all kinds of contexts and all sorts of, I guess we can call it deliverables. But I think there is still an appetite for a lot of the whys of the craft. And I think that's what we can lean into, is the intention behind the looks and not just the looks.
Yeah, it's hard to know where lightning's going to strike. There might be an incredible show on YouTube. I remember when Jury Duty got really popular a couple of years ago. It sort of put Freebie on the map, and it was similar. Like, oh wow, this is surprising that this, a new model, which is actually an old model, it's an ad-supported model, is catching eyes. But I do think in terms of like home devices and home surrounds being so different, I still think that HDR gives us a lot of capability to give the best possible picture for that variety of surrounds. I think having a large color volume in a living room on a phone with the windows all open probably gives you a better shot in enjoying the picture than a smaller color volume. But yeah, I mean, we've never been able to control how we have to let it go. And what I tell my clients is like, that's why we go to standards, because we don't know the range of the deviations that are out there.
Yeah, it's just a question of, people still relying on those standards and not getting lazy about where it might be viewed. Did you have any thoughts on it, Sheri?
No, I mean, when I have looked up some films on YouTube, it's usually very distressing.
Yeah. Yeah,
it's usually not a good situation, but I think I have to say that, for how many people have really amazing, monitors in their home, they feel like they don't necessarily even need to go to a theater. Mm-hmm. So the environments are so good in the home now. And that includes sound as well as picture. But, so I try not to worry too much. I told a funny story about someone watching, Oppenheimer on a airplane. So there's a lot of environments out there that aren't conducive to watching film or, movies. But you just kind of do, at least I've had the luxury in my career to be surrounded by really amazing people my entire career that are passionate about saving film, being true to the color, being true to the filmmakers, putting that first is the mission. So when you're done with all that work, you do have to just let it go, and you have to just let it be out there. And the tools keep changing, the tools keep getting better, but it just seems to lift everybody's expectations, which is okay. That's what we're all trying to do, is reach as far as we absolutely can.
I do think YouTube can drive people to find interest in something and then go deeper later. Like you can find some really interesting films on YouTube that's like, oh, this is an early film by this filmmaker that was, is not released anywhere else. And then you go out of your way to find it, and you can having a scattered and perhaps distressing visually entry point to some of these films. Can maybe give people, I tend to be a little bit Pollyannish. I do think people know when it looks weird, and they might go, what is wrong with that? I'm going to go try and watch it somewhere else. Or like, I really liked it, so maybe I'll spend $4 to rent it. and then maybe if they see it at a Fathom event, they'll go see it from there. I think that's, the access is a benefit to the chaos.
Well, and not just films on YouTube, but content creators themselves, seeing the options of how they can upload something might interest them in the space. And it's like, well, why doesn't my HDR look like the HDR that we see on Netflix and things like that? So it opens the curiosity. I think you have a level of consumers that are aware of color space in ways that, like, people somewhat know what HDR is in ways that they didn't before. And that only just opens the gates for us as creatives to kind of lean into craft.
I will say you just made me realize about how YouTube in many moments in my life, I realized it's like this unbelievable living archive. And there are things where you just end up down a rabbit hole of, of things that you're just not going to find them anywhere else. But it is pretty crazy how much is out there.
Yeah,
if you really just start diving.
I'm a fan of people exploring their interests and being able to have access. It's a door. It's not the only way to watch it, but it's a door to open. I mean, I think about certain idiosyncratic formats that I never used in my professional life, and even me, I'm a professional. Like, I touch pictures every day for a living. Like, you want to see how did somebody do this? So it is a living archive, even though it is a chaotic one.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how they continue to, YouTube itself, how they are trying to drive more high-end distribution to YouTube, and what that will look like in the future, literally look like. Well, we have 3 minutes. I think we have time for maybe 1 or 2 questions. All right. Mark, can you help us out? Thank you. It's perfect. That's what I want. Oh,
I'm curious, what a technological issue you guys face is, sort of maybe what one of the biggest challenges you see in either workflow or image quality as it pertains to technology, since we're at SIMD. So yeah, just sort of curious what comes to mind there in color or archive.
Well, the first thing that comes to mind to me is I feel like the biggest overlap of that is, how do you lose data well? Because if you wanted to have a perfect view of as much data as the human visual system could absorb, you just go open the door and look outside. But that's, I think that's the exciting question to me, is how do you lose data well, and how do you focus in?
I think one of the technological challenges that I think we're kind of addressing well is review with clients, and maintaining kind of a color fidelity through review, especially now as we have increasingly a lot of clients that might remote review, as well as some producers are remote, some producers are in person, and maintaining kind of a ground point in our color fidelity. I think that's a challenge that I think pre-pandemic I think the idea of remote review was no way. And now we're stepping into that. And I feel like that's kind of a hurdle.
It's been actually a great thing in some ways, because now I'm able to work with some people who would never make it to my room. Some of them are just not able to. So it has been kind of a gift, actually, this whole remote, workflow.
And then something that's more specific to, I think texture and grain is really popular right now, and I would like to have access to more tools to visualize compression in that chain, and how that affects that.
It's funny, because I was going to make a case to don't remove any grain if you're out there. Don't remove the grain from the movies.
It's really hot.
I think it's so powerful. I think it's so powerful seeing a panel of women colorists. I would like to know what inspired you to become a colorist, and how do you inspire the next generation of colorists?
When I started, I didn't know it was a job. My dad was an online editor, and so I started in editing because I didn't know what else there was to do. And I met someone who did this job, and I thought, oh, okay, that's really interesting. And I just asked if I could hang out, and then I had the opportunity where there was a facility where I could literally just hang out and kind of work for free. And I did that for over a year. And I thought, I could maybe do this job now. And I really just fell in love with it, quickly. But that's about access. I had access, and there was a ton of restoration work going on. And pretty soon someone trusted me with something. And, it's just, it is about access.
Yeah, I'm a similar boat. I did not know that color was a thing starting out. But I kind of I had a strong interest in painting and photography. And I think it honestly wasn't until I went to graduate school that I even knew that I could be a colorist. And I think something just clicked that there's a language for a lot of the visual things that I liked. And so that kind of sparked it. And, here I am.
Yeah, the connection to the world around you is the reason I like color. I have a 2.5-year-old daughter, and as I've been watching her, you know, when babies are really, really little, their visual systems are blobby. They can't see very far in front of their face. And watching her kind of like see things, that's been a huge source of inspiration, but I've always felt it's just a way to be connected to the world in a tangible way that, I don't know, it's just a language I like to speak, and I love the people that speak it too. Yeah.
Well, fortunately we have to wrap up, but thank you so much, each one of you, for taking again the time to be here and for sharing your insights. And to all of you for being here and for the vital conversation about preserving and advancing this craft. Thank you very much.